Jack Cooper stared at the work order on his tablet and fought the urge to bang his head against the nearest wall. Not that he could. The walls of the Intergalactic Embassy were lined with some sort of hypersensitive material that would probably trigger an emergency lockdown if he so much as sneezed on it. According to his alien co-workers, it was designed to protect the fragile inhabitants inside. Cooper friend, a cheerful voice warbled from behind him. Your endoskeleton hasn't shattered yet today. Most impressive. Speaking of fragile. Jack turned to face Ambassador Krillex's assistant, a blobby purple alien who insisted on calling himself Bob in an attempt to seem more Earth-friendly. Bob's protective environment suit made him look like a grape jello cup stuffed into a hazmat container. Morning, Bob. Still betting on my imminent demise, I see. Oh no, Cooper friend. We've updated our safety protocols specifically for humans. Did you notice the new warning signs? Jack glanced at the holographic display floating nearby. Caution, human zone, extreme danger, gravity exceeds 0.3 standard units. Thanks, Bob. Really appreciate the concern, but Earth gravity is actually. We also installed cushioning panels in all human-accessible areas. Bob's environmental suit rippled with pride. The phone activates automatically if it detects a human falling at speeds exceeding 0.1 meters per second. Jack had discovered this feature yesterday when he'd bent down to tie his shoe and triggered every safety foam dispenser in the corridor. It had taken maintenance 3 hours to clean up the mess, and he'd had to fill out 17 different safety incident reports. In triplicate. That's thoughtful, Jack managed. But I really need to fix this ventilation issue in Section C. The report says something about atmospheric contamination. Bob's translucent body darkened with concern. Ah, yes, most concerning. The air recyclers are producing dangerous levels of nitrogen. Nitrogen? You mean the thing that makes up most of Earth's atmosphere? Precisely. How do you survive in such hostile conditions? Our scientists theorize that humans must have evolved some form of natural force field. Jack opened his mouth to explain basic Earth biology, then thought better of it. The last time he'd tried, the embassy's medical staff had put him in quarantine for a week, convinced he was suffering from radiation-induced hallucinations. Sure, Bob. Natural force field. That's exactly how we do it. He hefted his toolbox. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to go risk my life fixing your definitely not broken air system. Wait, Bob oozed forward anxiously. You forgot your emergency beacon, and your backup beacon, and your backup beacon. Jack accepted the handful of blinking devices with a sigh. He'd learned it was easier to just go along with these things. Besides, the beacons made excellent paperweights. As he made his way to Section C, Jack dodged the usual morning chaos of the embassy. A group of crystalline beings from Rigel VII scattered at his approach, their facets flashing warning patterns about the dangerous human in their midst. 2 methane-breathing diplomats in their floating environment spheres gave him a wide berth, their tentacles curling in what he'd learned was their species' expression of concerned disapproval. The only ones who didn't seem terrified of his presence were the maintenance bots, probably because they were too busy following him around with cushions and warning signs. Jack had named the most persistent one Jeeves, mainly because it reminded him of an over-anxious butler, constantly hovering and fretting about his safety. I'm fine, Jeeves, he told the bot as it tried to place a warning hologram about the dangers of walking on flat surfaces directly in front of him. Really? Been walking on my own for years now. Got lots of practice. The bot responded by projecting a detailed diagram of human bone structure, complete with helpful annotations about its supposedly fragile nature. Jack was pretty sure whoever had compiled their information about human physiology had gotten their data mixed up with that of a particularly delicate species of space porcelain. Just another day at the office, really. Though he had to admit, for all their misguided concern about human fragility, his alien co-workers were growing on him. Kind of like a very worried, very alien family. Now, about that dangerous nitrogen leak. Jack was elbow deep in the ventilation system's control panel when the first alarm went off. He ignored it. Alarms went off in the embassy roughly every 8 minutes, usually because someone had detected a human doing something dangerous, like drinking hot coffee or climbing a single step without safety equipment. The second alarm was harder to ignore, mainly because it was accompanied by Bob's voice echoing through the corridor in a pitch that could shatter glass. Cooper friend. Emergency. Catastrophic emergency. Jack extracted himself from the panel with a sigh. Bob, I told you humans don't actually need to be warned about. Little Squish is trapped. It got Jack's attention. Little Squish was Ambassador Krillex's offspring, a tiny blob of purple goo who had earned their nickname by leaving trails of slime everywhere they went. Despite being technically amorphous, they had somehow mastered the art of making puppy dog eyes that worked across species barriers. Trapped where? The atmospheric processing chamber. Bob's environmental suit was cycling through colors faster than a disco ball. There's been a malfunction. The temperature controls are failing. Jack was already moving. How bad? It's reaching Earth normal temperatures. That's not actually that bad. The safety systems have locked down the entire section. No one can get through. The heat levels are fatal to most species. Bob was practically vibrating with panic. The ambassador is beside themselves. Literally, they've stress divided into 3 separate entities. They rounded the corner to find what looked like half the embassy's staff crowded around the entrance to the atmospheric processing section. Ambassador Krillex, all 3 of them were being restrained by security drones as they tried to surge toward the sealed doors. My child, all 3 versions of the ambassador wailed in harmony. My precious baby. Jack pushed through the crowd, which parted like the Red Sea at his approach. Multiple species still believed human touch could be toxic. What exactly happened? The embassy's chief engineer, a floating cloud of sentient gas named Puff, another attempt at Earth-friendly naming, condensed anxiously. Little Squish was playing in the maintenance tunnels. Again, several voices added. When the primary thermal regulator failed. The backup systems engaged, but they're malfunctioning, cycling the temperature up instead of down. The chamber is approaching 300 Kelvin. That's room temperature, Jack pointed out. Exactly, Puff expanded in horror. Absolutely unsurvivable. Jack looked at the sealed doors, then at the monitoring screen showing Little Squish huddled in a corner of the processing chamber, their tiny form rippling with fear. The temperature was indeed rising to about what Jack kept his apartment on a cool day. The rescue teams can't get in, Bob explained frantically. Their environmental suits would fail at those temperatures. We've called for special equipment from the nearest emergency response center, but it won't arrive for at least an hour. Little Squish doesn't have an hour, all 3 Krillex versions sobbed. Jack rubbed his temples. Let me get this straight. The chamber is currently at normal human room temperature. The doors are locked because the system thinks it's an emergency, and no one can get in because you're all convinced you'll literally melt. Precisely, Bob's suit had settled on a sickly green color. It's hopeless. Jack looked at the doors again, then at his toolbox, then at the distraught ambassadoress. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his embassy access card. Cooper friend, Bob's voice rose another octave. What are you doing? My job. Jack swiped his card through the reader. Override code Cooper Alpha 72. Emergency access granted. The doors slid open with a hiss. Immediately, waves of what felt to Jack like perfectly pleasant air washed over the crowd. Several aliens recoiled in horror. Cooper friend. No, Bob tried to grab him with a suit-covered appendage. You'll be killed. Jack shrugged off the grip and stepped through the doorway. I really won't. The last thing he heard before the doors sealed behind him was the collective gasp of dozens of aliens watching what they clearly thought was a suicide mission. Just another Tuesday at the Intergalactic Embassy. Jack strode through the deadly room temperature chamber, taking occasional sips from his coffee cup. He'd grabbed it on his way in, partly because he needed the caffeine and partly because he knew it would drive the watching aliens absolutely crazy. The entire front wall of the chamber was transparent, and he could see the crowd of embassy staff pressed against it, their various appendages, tentacles, and sensory organs displaying every possible sign of distress their species could manage. He gave them a little wave. Someone fainted. Hey, Little Squish, he called out, his voice echoing in the chamber. Your parents are worried about you. All 3 of them. At the moment. A small purple blob peeked out from behind a conduit. Cooper maintenance? You came to rescue me. Sure did. Though I gotta say, this is a lot more comfortable than that time I had to fix the cryo unit in Section F. That was actually cold. Little Squish oozed out a bit further. But the temperature warnings are about as accurate as your dad's understanding of human biology. Jack took another sip of coffee. Through the window, he could see Bob having what appeared to be an anxiety-induced color seizure. Want to get out of here? Is it safe? Little Squish rippled uncertainly. Well, let's see. Jack made a show of checking his vital signs. Heart still beating, lungs still working, coffee still hot. Yeah, I'd say we're good. He could practically hear the collective alien gasp as he walked closer to Little Squish. The chamber's warning systems were going berserk, red lights flashing and automated voices announcing imminent doom in 17 different languages. Jack was pretty sure one of them was interpretive dance. But how Little Squish had extended a pseudopod in fascination. The heat should have liquefied your organs by now. Kid, this is the same temperature as my living room. Actually, it's a bit cooler than my shower this morning. He knelt down beside the small alien. Though I probably shouldn't mention the shower thing to your dad. Last time they heard about humans voluntarily standing under falling water, they tried to have Earth classified as an extreme sports planet. Through the window, he could see various aliens taking readings and gesturing frantically at monitors. A team of medical personnel had set up what looked like a field hospital, presumably expecting him to emerge as a puddle of melted human. Someone was already filling out death certificates. Now, what do you say we get out of here before your dad splits into any more copies? Jack held out his hand. I promise the temperature in the hallway is exactly the same as in here. The system's just being dramatic. Little Squish hesitated, then extended a pseudopod to wrap around Jack's wrist. You're sure we won't die? Cross my supposedly fragile heart. He stood up, tiny alien in tow. Though I should warn you, your Uncle Bob is probably going to need therapy after watching this. As if on cue, Bob's environment suit began cycling through colors so rapidly it looked like a malfunctioning disco ball. Several other aliens had covered their visual organs, unable to watch what they presumably thought was about to be a gruesome scene. Jack walked back toward the door, Little Squish clinging to his arm and firing off questions rapid fire. Is it true humans drink liquid hot enough to melt plastic? Do you really sleep lying down? Can you actually survive in unfiltered sunlight? Why isn't your skeleton collapsing? Yes, and because human bones are actually pretty sturdy. He reached the door and swiped his card again. Though maybe don't mention that last part to the medical staff. They just finished their latest thesis on how humans must be held together by psychic energy. The doors slid open, and Jack stepped out into what could only be described as organized chaos. Medical drones swarmed around him with scanners while the emergency response team tried to figure out how he wasn't dead. All three versions of Ambassador Krill X surged forward, converging into a single entity out of sheer relief as Little Squish leapt into their arms. My baby. My precious child. The ambassador enveloped Little Squish in a gelatinous hug. Are you hurt? Are you traumatized? Are you? Dad. Dad. You'll never believe it. Cooper Maintenance drank hot liquid while rescuing me. It was amazing. Jack took another pointed sip of his coffee, causing several nearby aliens to cringe in horror. Bob had apparently short-circuited his environment suit's color systems and was now stuck in a sort of pulsing mauve. So Jack said casually, about that nitrogen leak I was fixing before all this. The entire medical team descended on him at once, scanners whirring. Someone was shouting about impossible readings. Someone else was already drafting a paper titled Miracle or Madness, the Human Who Survived Room Temperature. Just another hour at the Intergalactic Embassy. Getting back to work after saving Little Squish proved more challenging than the actual rescue. The embassy's medical staff had gone into full research mode, convinced they'd witnessed either a miracle or a complete rewriting of known physics. Jack had already been scanned, probed, and analyzed by more devices than he could count, and Bob hadn't stopped following him around with a radiation detector, convinced he must be generating some kind of protective force field. Cooper friend Bob warbled, waving the detector for the 100th time. Are you absolutely certain you're not emitting any kind of energy shield? Pretty sure. Bob Jack was trying to get back to the ventilation panel he'd abandoned earlier. Unless you count the shield of pure irritation I'm developing right now. Fascinating. A psychic defense mechanism. Bob's suit rippled with excitement. I must inform the research team. Before Jack could protest that he'd been joking, the embassy's emergency sirens began wailing again. This time, they had a different pitch, the kind that made Jack's teeth itch and probably had half the crystalline beings in the building vibrating at their resonant frequency. Warning announced the embassy's AI in what Jack had dubbed its "we're all going to die" voice. Critical system failure in atmospheric processing. Temperature continuing to rise. Beginning emergency evacuation procedures. Jack looked at his unfinished repair job, then at the fleeing aliens, and put two and two together. Bob, exactly what happens if the nitrogen leak I was fixing meets a malfunctioning temperature regulator. Bob's environmental suit turned a shade of white Jack hadn't seen since that time he'd explained humans sneezing to the ambassador. According to my calculations, nothing good. The sirens reached a new pitch that probably had dogs barking on Earth. Attention, atmospheric processing chamber now exceeding 305 Kelvin. Structural integrity compromised. Please proceed to your designated evacuation points while screaming in an orderly fashion. That's about 90 degrees Fahrenheit, Jack muttered. Barely hot enough for a beach day. Beach day. Bob's suit cycled through several disturbed colors. You mean humans voluntarily expose themselves to such temperatures for recreation? Sometimes we even wear less clothing to do it. Bob made a sound like a squeaky toy having an existential crisis. Look, Jack said, grabbing his toolbox, I need to fix this before your environmental systems have a complete meltdown, both literally and figuratively. But Cooper friend Bob oozed after him in distress. The temperature, the nitrogen, the everything. It's fine. It's just going to be a bit warm in there. Jack was already heading toward the processing chamber. Though you might want to evacuate anyone who actually could be hurt by the heat. And maybe get the ambassador's permission forms ready. I have a feeling I'm going to be signing a lot of waivers after this. The chamber, when he reached it, looked like something out of a low-budget disaster movie. Steam was dramatically venting from various pipes. Warning lights were flashing in patterns that probably spelled out doom. In at least 12 alien languages, and the temperature display was climbing in a way that had the remaining embassy staff backing away in terror. Jack swiped his access card again. The door refused to open. Safety protocols engaged, the AI announced smugly. Temperature exceeds survivable limits. Override code Cooper Alpha 72. Jack tried again. Override denied. Detected presence of squishy organic being. That's kind of discriminatory, don't you think? Safety of squishy organic beings is prime directive. Jack leaned against the door, considering his options. Behind him, he could hear Bob calling for backup, presumably to stop the crazy human from attempting another suicide mission. Well, if the AI wanted to play it that way. Hey, computer, Jack called out. Quick question about those safety protocols. They're designed to protect embassy staff, right? And affirmative. And the atmospheric processes are crucial for maintaining survivable conditions in the embassy, correct? Affirmative. So if they fail completely, what happens to all those squishy organic beings you're trying to protect? There was a pause. Jack could almost hear the AI's circuits straining, processing logical paradox, recalculating risk assessment. Override accepted. The door slid open with a hiss of actually kind of warm air. Jack stepped through, toolbox in hand, as behind him Bob's environment suit cycled through colors faster than a hyperactive chameleon at a rave. I'll be back in a few minutes, Jack called over his shoulder. Try not to declare me legally dead while I'm gone this time. The door sealed behind him, and Jack found himself in what the embassy staff probably thought was literal hell. The temperature had indeed risen. He was definitely going to have to take off his jacket, and the nitrogen leak was making the air a bit thick. For Earth standards, it felt like a slightly humid day in Florida. For embassy standards, it was apparently the apocalypse. Through the observation window, he could see a crowd gathering again. Someone was setting up monitoring equipment. Someone else appeared to be preparing what looked suspiciously like a eulogy. And was that a shrine being constructed in the corner? Jack sighed and got to work. Just another perfectly normal day at the Intergalactic Embassy, where fixing a broken air conditioner qualified as an act of heroic sacrifice. At least the overtime pay was good. The repair job took exactly 23 minutes. Jack knew this because Bob had been counting down outside, apparently timing how long a human could survive in what the embassy's scientists were already calling extreme thermal conditions. He emerged from the chamber to find he'd acquired a whole new set of titles, including the indestructible one-temperature Bane and his personal favorite, he who walks through fire but still requires safety foam when using stairs. Ambassador Krill X was waiting for him, surrounded by what appeared to be every medical professional in the sector, and at least 3 documentary crews. Cooper Maintenance, the ambassador burbled formally, "You have saved this embassy twice today. First my precious child, and now our entire atmospheric system. How can we ever repay such bravery in the face of certain, well, what we thought was certain death?" "Just doing my job," Jack said, trying to wipe some sweat from his forehead. Several aliens gasped at this evidence of human thermal regulation. Is that toxic waste leaking from your skin pores?" Bob asked, fascinated and horrified. "It's just sweat, Bob. Humans do that to cool down." "You mean," Bob's suit turned a thoughtful shade of blue, "you have built-in liquid cooling systems?" "Something like that." This set off a new wave of scientific excitement. Jack could already see papers being drafted: human thermal regulation, natural engineering, or evidence of ancient cybernetic enhancement. Cooper Maintenance, the ambassador continued, "In light of your remarkable abilities, we would like to officially modify your position here at the embassy. Look, if this is about the safety phone dispensers, I really don't need. We would like to designate you as our official environmental crisis response specialist." Jack blinked. "You want to promote me because I can survive room temperature?" "Not just room temperature," Bob chimed in excitedly. "You also regularly handle superheated liquids, expose yourself to raw dihydrogen monoxide, and somehow maintain structural integrity in Earth's crushing gravity." "You mean I drink coffee, take showers, and stand up?" Exactly, the ambassador's surface rippled with enthusiasm. "Such remarkable abilities must be properly utilized. Of course, this would come with a significant increase in your compensation package." "And how significant?" "We've calculated appropriate hazard pay for each of your regular activities. Let's see." The ambassador consulted a datapad: daily exposure to Earth normal temperatures, handling of hot beverages, voluntary contact with falling water, repeated resistance to gravitational forces. As the ambassador listed off what was essentially Jack's normal daily routine, he did some quick mental math. The total was actually pretty impressive. "We would also like to establish a research partnership," one of the scientists piped up. "Nothing invasive, just regular scans to study your apparently impossible biology. For science. And teaching opportunities," added Bob. "Little Squish has already asked to learn more about human temperature resistance techniques. Though perhaps we should start with something less dangerous than coffee drinking, maybe just standing in direct sunlight." Jack looked around at the crowd of aliens, all watching him with what he now recognized as a mixture of terror and awe. The same beings who'd insisted on installing safety phone dispensers everywhere were now looking at him like some kind of invincible superhero, all because he could handle a warm room and a hot drink. "You know what," he said finally. "Why not? But I have one condition." "Anything," the ambassador agreed immediately. "In the safety phone dispensers. They have got to go." There was a collective gasp of horror. But what if you fall?" Bob's suit had gone pale with concern. "I promise you I can handle a 3-foot drop without turning into a puddle." The ambassador looked conflicted. Perhaps we could keep just a few? In the high-risk areas, like the cafeteria." "The cafeteria is at ground level. But you handle those superheated beverages there." Jack sighed. "Some battles weren't worth fighting. Fine, cafeteria foam stays. But I want it on record that humans don't actually need impact cushioning to drink coffee." Of course, the ambassador was practically glowing with relief. "We'll update all our safety protocols immediately. Now, about your new duties." As the ambassador launched into a detailed description of his new role, Jack caught sight of Little Squish in the crowd, watching him with undisguised admiration. The tiny alien was wearing what appeared to be a human-style baseball cap, probably their first step toward emulating their new hero. Well, Jack thought, at least someone around here was developing a reasonable perspective on human capabilities, even if they were currently trying to figure out how to drink coffee without having a biological crisis. Just another career advancement at the Intergalactic Embassy. Though he had to admit, environmental crisis response specialist did have a nice ring to it. 1 month after the Great Temperature Crisis, as it had come to be known in embassy records, Jack's life had settled into a new kind of normal. A very weird, distinctly alien kind of normal. His new office, because apparently environmental crisis response specialists rated actual offices, came with 3 different plaques: Temperature Warrior, Gravity Defier, and Master of Deadly Dihydrogen Monoxide. Someone had also added a small shrine in the corner, where various embassy staff would occasionally leave offerings of room temperature water and what they believed were safety-approved snacks. The research team had finally stopped following him around with scanners, though only after he'd agreed to weekly survival documentation sessions. These mostly consisted of him doing perfectly normal things while scientists took notes and gasped. Last week's session of him drinking hot coffee while walking upstairs had already been submitted to 3 different xenobiology journals. Cooper friend Bob's familiar voice warbled from the doorway. His environment suit was sporting a new attachment that looked suspiciously like a coffee cup holder. "We have another situation that requires your unique capabilities." "Let me guess, someone set the thermostat above 70 degrees again." Worse, Bob's suit rippled with anxiety. "The agricultural section is experiencing precipitation." Jack pinched the bridge of his nose. "You mean the sprinkler system is on?" "Exactly. Little Squish is already there, taking notes for their human survivability studies project." That was another change. The ambassador's offspring had appointed themselves Jack's unofficial apprentice, determined to document and eventually master what they called advanced human survival techniques. So far, this had mostly involved watching Jack do completely normal things and making detailed notes about his continued failure to dissolve, melt, or spontaneously combust. When Jack arrived at the agricultural section, he found Little Squish perched safely behind the observation glass, wearing a tiny replica of his maintenance uniform and scribbling frantically in a notebook. "Cooper Mentor," they burbled excitedly. "Are you going to demonstrate advanced water resistance techniques?" "I'm going to turn off the sprinklers, yes." "Fascinating. And you'll do this without a protective force field?" "For the last time, humans don't have force fields." Of course, Little Squish nodded sagely while writing natural force field in their notes. Jack walked into the agricultural section, ignored the emergency warnings about deadly water exposure, and reached for the sprinkler control panel. Behind him, he could hear Little Squish providing commentary to the gathered crowd. "Notice how the human maintains structural integrity despite direct contact with dihydrogen monoxide. Truly remarkable. And observe no signs of dissolution or molecular destabilization." Bob's voice chimed in anxiously. "But surely there are limits to their power. Perhaps we should install emergency drying stations." Actually, Jack called over his shoulder as he adjusted the settings. "Humans can deliberately immerse themselves in water for extended periods. Some of us even do it for fun." The stunned silence that followed was broken only by the sound of Little Squish's excited scribbling and what might have been someone fainting. Later that day, Jack returned to his office to find a new plaque had been added to his wall. Master of Voluntary Aquatic Immersion. Below it was a framed safety waiver, officially acknowledging his right to handle water without protective equipment. It was probably the only one of its kind in the galaxy. On his desk, he found a note from Ambassador Krill X, requesting his presence at next week's Interstellar Safety Conference. Apparently, he was to give a presentation on human environmental adaptation capabilities. The title was already set beyond the impossible: how humanity defies the laws of nature through advanced evolution and/or possible supernatural powers. Jack looked at the note, then at his collection of plaques, then at the small shrine of room temperature water bottles in the corner. Through his office window, he could see Little Squish demonstrating human-style walking to a group of fascinated aliens, while Bob hovered nearby with safety foam at the ready. You know what he said to no one in particular, taking a deliberate sip of his dangerously hot coffee? "I think I'm actually starting to enjoy this." Just another day as the embassy's resident indestructible human. At least the safety foam in the cafeteria was starting to grow on him. Kind of like a very worried, very protective, very alien family. Though he really needed to do something about that shrine.